Welcome to the fourth video of the series, Bring Your Family Together. My name is Gerald Efting. Today I'm going to share with you the 4 challenges that every family of wealth face, as well as the generational encounters. And when we think of generations, if we use an example of mobile communication or communication as a whole, some generations might think of TikTok or Snapchat, versus another generation might think of texting. My generation might think of using the mobile phone strictly for calling other people on voice to voice. Now, none of these are right or wrong. It's just different. And when we look at family business, what are some of the challenges or adversity they may face between generations? There might be conflict over what the future vision should be. There might be pressure to succeed. That expectation, that pressure of expectations that maybe they even put upon themselves versus expectation what others have of them. You are not doing it the way that I have or the way it should be done. The current leadership or the matriarch or patriarch might have difficulty in letting go. There might be some control issues, or they prefer slower change or slower transition versus quicker. There might be a disagreement over readiness. I think I'm ready. I don't think so. There might be entitlement versus contribution, a sense of entitlement versus a sense of merit. There might be a definition of success might differ. The rising or next generation might want more sooner than what the current leader would expect. They might want increased responsibility, more leadership roles, more inclusion in key decisions or key meetings. So how would you deal with this? Here are some questions that'll help. When should we start working with the rising or next generation? When should you start working with the next generation in your family? How do we support them through the pressures or the fear of not meeting expectations? Do they have to be me? How will we know when we are controlling, not letting go? How can we communicate better, more effectively? Here's a key one. How can we help the younger generation feel more positive about the future? Especially in this day and age, there's a lot of hopelessness and issues of what the future would look like. Well, how do we help the rising generation of your family feel more positive about their future, about the possibilities of what they can accomplish? What guidelines can we set up to help ourselves and the rising generations? What development is required, or what training is required? What experience is required? What is our shared vision for the future? And all of this will take communication, and more communication. A lot of discussion. When you have that discussion and we have those communications open, then your legacy is clarified and developed. And it helps not only in where you're going, but what you're doing day to day. It helps in your relationships, and it also brings more harmony. So those are keys when you're talking about generations and bringing the generations together. The 4 challenges that every family of wealth face. I just wanted to remind you about the 3-circle model: the family, the business, and the ownership. And a lot of times these challenges are faced by the parents from the parent point of view. And their primary role is that of the parent. And so a lot of what we default to. So when we start looking at the 4 challenges, we come from a parent point of view. And so the question I have as we go through this is, how could these, or how are these challenges affecting your family? The first one, fair versus equal. Is fair always equal? A very simple example is a family I talked to is that they had 3 children, and one of the children's bicycles actually was broken, and so they needed a new bicycle. And So what's fair is that one child got a new bicycle, or do all three children get new bicycles? What's fair? What's equal? And when we come to different, more difficult discussions around compensation, you now have family members, whether it's spouses of your children, or maybe it's your children, or it's your nephews or nieces, or it's your uncles, etc. They'll have different roles within the business. Are they compensated equally? Or are they compensated fairly? What perspective are you coming from? That of a parent, or that of a business manager or a business leader? When we talk about succession, this even becomes even more complicated and complex. When you talk about succession of a business, what's fair and what's equal? Who controls it? Who becomes the next leader? How is that determined? Or if you have two children in the business, do they run the business together equally? Is that fair? When it looks at ownership of the business, and you have one child that's part of the business and engaged in the business heavily, and the other one is not engaged in the business at all. When you look at ownership, what is the perspective you're coming from? Will that ownership be fair between both children? Is it equal between both children? Is fair and equal the exact same? What family conflict can this cause? One final example is dividing financial assets. Do you divide them fairly and equally? A lot of times, if you're coming from a parent's point of view, this becomes very difficult, the fair versus equal. And it can cause conflicts. It can cause sibling rivalry. It can cause conflicts between parents, because one parent might believe that it should always be equal. So these are discussions that you need to have, and with both your partner and ultimately your children. Burden versus responsibility. The burden is I'm expected to. It becomes an obligation. Responsibility, I get to. It's a choice. You demand loyalty to the family business is a burden, versus I follow my own dreams. I stay loyal to the family business, but I follow my own dreams of happiness. There's also the burden of money versus the responsibility of money. The burden of money is interesting because in this day and age of social media, it's becoming more and more unpopular to have money. The other question that comes into from a burden of money is, does you fill in the blank only love me for my money? Do my friends only hang out with me for my money? And on the responsibility side, the responsibility of money, how do I handle money? What does money mean to me? In future videos, we're going to talk about our relationship with wealth and the relationship of money. But this burden versus responsibility. What is a burden that your family members are carrying, or do they just feel responsibility? It's a great way to have that discussion as well, is around burden versus responsibilities. Enablement versus empowerment. Enablement is justifying an individual's bad behavior. What are the excuses? Empowerment is when they take responsibility and accountability for their own actions. So do I enable or empower my children? What are the guidelines and boundaries? What's acceptable? What's not acceptable? Do they know what's acceptable and what's not acceptable? One of the keys is to establish family governance. What is the accepted behaviors? Do I help them out, or is it okay to allow them to fail? It's a great question. As a parent, we always find it very difficult to allow our children to fail and to watch them go through that. It's very, very difficult. The empowerment, prepared to accept responsibility for the action. And they don't blame others for choices and will not play victim. Enablement versus empowerment. How does that play out in your family? Entitlement versus contribution. Entitlement comes from a perspective of what's in it for me. Very self-centered base. Contribution or merit, it's earned. Very outward or giving base. So what roles and responsibility do we give to our children within the business? Is it given or is it earned? What are the temptations of wealth and luxury? Do they expect only the best things versus earning to get the best things? If they only see you fly in private jets, when they get older, they're going to expect to fly in private jets. One of the great questions that I ask is, what was the first car you owned? And most of the time it's an old beater or anything else. And then when I ask, okay, what was the first car your child owned? And usually it's a different discussion. I read in one of the books that I've been reading is around giving your family both box seat experiences as well as bench seat experiences. So what are the key questions? What discussions on the 4 challenges are required in your family? The fair versus equal, the burden versus responsibility, the enablement versus empowerment, entitlement versus contribution or merit. What discussions do you need to have? Maybe sit with your partner and go through these 4 different challenges. What are the thoughts? What is the visions of the future? How would different generations think through these different challenges? The next steps. How do you feel? What were you feeling or what were you thinking as we went through the 4 challenges or the generational encounters? What were you feeling? What were you thinking? What value has this video brought to you? And what will you commit to? What actions will you commit to in the next week? And then how can I serve you? If I can serve you better, if I can serve you in more conversation about these topics, please reach out. My email is below. You can also connect with me via LinkedIn. So thank you for taking the time. I appreciate that. I know how busy people are. So thank you. And until next video, take care. Stay safe.